10 years. That was how long I had been excluded by my own parents and the entire family from every reunion. No Thanksgiving invitations, no Christmas calls, not even a simple birthday card. I had become the shadow, the name they crossed off the list without hesitation because they believed I would never amount to anything. But life has a way of turning. From nothing, I built my career, bought land in the suburbs, and raised a mansion that stood as a symbol of the persistence and ambition they once mocked. And then, on an ordinary morning, the doorbell rang. I checked the security camera and almost laughed. There they were, my parents, my so-called perfect sister, and a few relatives standing at my gate after 10 years of silence. I opened the door, calmly invited them in, and watched as the color drained from their faces one by one when they realized the truth. This was no longer the failed Eleanor they remembered. This was the moment I stood tall, facing my entire family with calm and strength. What would you do if the very people who once cast you aside suddenly returned only because of your success? And where are you listening to this story from? I would love to hear your story in the comments. Thank you so much. Hi, my name is Eleanor Hart. I was born and raised in a working-class family on the outskirts of Houston. My father, Robert, worked as a maintenance engineer at a chemical plant, while my mother, Linda, was a part-time nurse at a dental clinic. Our income was modest, but it was enough to keep a roof over our heads and simple meals on the table. From a young age, I understood that in this family, a person's worth was measured by very specific standards: grades, athletic achievements, recognition from others. And in that game, I was never the chosen one. My sister Vanessa was always the shining star. She had near-perfect grades, was on the school cheerleading squad, and later earned a full scholarship to a prestigious university. My parents could not contain their pride, telling neighbors, coworkers, and relatives about their perfect daughter over and over again. At every family gathering, my father would raise his glass to toast Vanessa's latest achievement, while my mother would proudly show off photos of her in her cheerleader uniform as if they were priceless treasures. But I was different. From a young age, I was drawn to things that adults dismissed as meaningless. I could sit for hours sketching the house of my dreams, cutting out magazine images to imagine what the living room would look like with an extra window, or rummaging through a box of scrap wood to build a model. When my parents found me spreading paper and pens across the floor instead of studying math, they sighed and shook their heads. "That girl is always daydreaming," my mother would say. My father's voice would harden. "What good will drawing do you? Focus on getting good grades like your sister." Those words, repeated throughout my childhood, sank into my mind like a label. Useless, impractical, not worthy. I still remember every Sunday family gathering at my grandmother's house in Houston. Her red brick home, with the long wooden table in the dining room, was always the stage for their display of accomplishments. Everyone sat together, and as a matter of habit, the first stories were always about Vanessa. She just got a perfect score on the advanced math test. The university sent her an acceptance letter. She's going to compete in the statewide cheer competition. The applause, the cheers, the proud nods filled the room. When it was my turn, most questions were polite small talk. "Are you doing okay? What subjects are you taking?" If I excitedly pulled out a drawing I'd finished in art class, people's eyes skimmed over it and quickly moved on to another topic. And somehow, even at 16 or 17, I was always seated at the far end of the table, next to younger cousins. While Vanessa sat beside our grandmother, the center of every compliment, I felt like a shadow, existing only to fill empty space. I used to think maybe I was just being overly sensitive, but the older I grew, the more I realized the favoritism was real, clear, and openly displayed. Once, when I won first place in a school interior design competition, I rushed home with the certificate, hoping that at least this time my parents would be proud of me. Instead, my father gave a dismissive laugh. "What good is an art contest? A girl should train to be a nurse like your mother, a stable job." Just a week later, when Vanessa won another academic award, the whole family threw a small party, calling distant relatives to share the news. I stood on the sidelines, hearing the laughter echoing from the living room, my chest tight with both pain and shame. As time went on, the comparisons became wounds too deep to heal. Every holiday, my parents would tell relatives that Vanessa was their pride, while I was mentioned briefly, like a name they were obligated to include. In their eyes, I was the cautionary tale, the living example for the younger cousins. Study hard like Vanessa, don't waste time on silly dreams like Eleanor. I remember one uncle, laughing, said directly to my face, "If it weren't for Vanessa, this family would have no one to be proud of." Those words stunned me into silence, as if my entire existence had no value beyond serving as a backdrop for my sister's spotlight. When I turned 18, while my friends were applying to big universities and my family was busy planning a celebration for Vanessa's admission into a prestigious business school, I chose a different path. I enrolled in architecture at a community college in Houston. That decision nearly froze the entire family. My father looked at me as though I had committed an unforgivable mistake. "You had the grades to get into a 4-year university, and you chose that cheap option? Do you realize what people will think? Vanessa will be getting her MBA, and you'll be stuck in some low-level school?" My mother pressed her hand to her forehead and complained to my grandmother that I was deliberately choosing a different path just to rebel. At that dinner, no one asked why I chose architecture. No one cared that I had loved drawings and building models since I was a child. All they saw was a choice that was less valuable, less prestigious in the eyes of the world. I didn't fight back. Instead of arguing, I threw myself into studying and working part-time jobs. At night, I waited tables at a cafe to pay tuition. During the day, I sat in class absorbing theory, and on weekends, I worked as a construction laborer for a small company in Houston. I carried bricks, mixed concrete, hauled wooden boards, and eventually was allowed to stand near the supervisors, observing how they managed projects, coordinated workers, checked blueprints, and compared them with reality. It was on those construction sites that I learned lessons no textbook could ever teach, that every house is more than just concrete and bricks. It is a complex system that demands patience, coordination, and vision. I came home exhausted, my clothes covered in dust and lime, but inside me burned a fire no one in my family could see. I knew that every brick I laid was a foundation for my future. While I struggled through endless shifts, Vanessa continued to soar. After graduating with top honors in her bachelor's program, she enrolled in an MBA at a prestigious university. The news spread quickly. My grandmother threw a small party in her honor, relatives from afar sent gifts and called to congratulate her. My parents walked with pride, bragging about their eldest daughter wherever they went. Vanessa was admitted into an MBA program. Not everyone can achieve that. I listened to those words in silence. From the shadows, I realized the gap between me and the rest of the family was widening not only in achievements, but in recognition. Then one day, I understood I had been completely cast aside. It was Thanksgiving of my sophomore year. I came home, hoping at least to sit down and share dinner with everyone as before. But when I opened the door, the house was silent. No smell of roasted turkey, no familiar chatter and laughter. I called my mother, and she answered coldly. "This year everyone is eating at your grandmother's. I figured you were busy with school, so I didn't want to bother you." I froze. It was the first time in my life I had not been invited to a family gathering. Later, I learned the truth. They were embarrassed to have me at the table, afraid that guests and relatives would compare me again to Vanessa, the perfect daughter who was preparing for an exchange semester abroad. From that moment on, I was officially absent from every reunion. Every year, photos of their reunions still appeared on social media. The family gathered around the dinner table, raising glasses in celebration, smiling brightly. I watched from afar, feeling as though I was standing behind a glass wall, able to see everything clearly but never allowed to step inside. My empty chair was long forgotten. No messages, no check-ins, no words of concern. They had erased my name from the family circle. I became a shadow in the truest sense, existing, but never acknowledged. At that time, I felt both hurt and humiliated, but I also began to realize that their exclusion had freed me from a suffocating chain. No more dinners filled with tension, no more mocking laughter, no more comparing glances. I had lost my family on paper, but I had gained the freedom to build a path of my own. Every brick I laid at a construction site, every blueprint I completed, became a quiet response to the years I had been dismissed. And I swore that one day, they would witness this so-called uselessness transform into something they could never have imagined. When I turned 23, while many of my peers were still scrambling to secure stable jobs after graduation, I gambled my future on a bold decision. Along with 2 classmates from my architecture program who, like me, had no desire to become low-level employees in some design office, I took out a bank loan, combined with what little savings we had, to buy an old, run-down house in the suburbs of Houston. That house had once been the pride of a working-class family in the 1972nd, but now the roof leaked, the wooden floors were rotted by termites, and the walls were peeling in patches. To outsiders, it looked like nothing but a pile of bricks waiting to collapse. But to us, it was opportunity. We threw ourselves into the work without rest. During the day, I still worked part-time on construction sites to cover my living expenses, but in the evenings and on weekends the 3 of us cleaned, replaced the roof, polished the floors, rebuilt the plumbing and electrical systems, and most importantly, breathed new life into the design. We kept classic details like the wooden staircase, but blended them with a modern style, adding glass windows to draw in natural light. 6 months later, the house was completely transformed into a spacious, bright living space, and we sold it for double the purchase price. The profit wasn't much once split 3 ways, but it gave me something far more valuable than money, the conviction that I was on the right path. After that first venture, we kept going. Each project taught us something new. How to negotiate material costs, how to work with contractors, how to persuade potential buyers. Gradually, I became skilled not only in design but also in project management. I learned when to cut costs and when to invest boldly to create impact. We reinvested our capital, and after 3 years, what started with 1 old house had turned into more than 10 renovated homes, each sale adding both money and experience to our journey. Yet that happiness was never shared with my family. I tried, once. During a rare phone call with my mother, I excitedly told her that the 3rd house we had renovated was attracting offers higher than expected from a young couple. She was silent for a moment before replying flatly, "I still think you should find a stable job. Doing risky things like that, what if you lose money?" Hearing that felt like having cold water poured over me. To them, everything I was building was just a reckless gamble, a prolonged whim. They never saw the sweat, the sleepless nights, the calluses on my hands. In their eyes, I was still only the child on the outside. The disdain reached its peak at a family party I remember vividly. It was my grandmother's 70th birthday. I came with the hope of at least one peaceful evening. When everyone had raised their glasses in celebration, someone asked my father how his 2 daughters were doing. He stood, his voice full of pride as he spoke about Vanessa. She just finished her first year in the MBA program, and her professors can't stop praising her. Truly, she is proof of hard work and discipline. The whole room applauded. Then the eyes turned to me. Before I could even open my mouth, my father gave a dismissive laugh and continued. "And Eleanor, she's still experimenting. You know how it is, some children succeed, and some are just failed experiments." Then, the room fell silent for a few seconds, followed by awkward laughter. I stood frozen, the glass trembling in my hand. The words "failed experiment" echoed in my head like a knife. I didn't argue, I didn't cry in front of them. I simply set my glass down, excused myself, and left. At the door, I took a deep breath to hold back the lump in my throat and swore to myself that it would be the last time I ever attended such a family gathering. If, in their eyes, I was nothing more than a failed experiment, then I would leave that laboratory forever. The years that followed were lonely. I no longer attended any reunions, nor did I expect a call or a message of concern. Every weekend, while friends gathered with their families, I was on construction sites with mortar on my hands, or bent over a drafting table late into the night. There were long nights when I asked myself if it was worth trading family ties for a career. But each time an old house transformed into a dream home for a young family, each time I saw the joy on a buyer's face, I knew I had chosen correctly. My blood relatives had turned their backs on me, but I was creating another kind of family, the homes I helped build. And that gave me the strength to keep going, no matter the ridicule whispered behind my back. From that day forward, I understood that I no longer needed their approval. I would let time and my accomplishments speak for themselves. And one day, when they finally realized it, it would be too late to reclaim the years they had lost. In the years after I stepped out of my family's shadow, I poured every ounce of energy into my work, refusing to allow myself a single day of rest. Starting with small houses in Houston, I began to broaden my vision and dream of larger projects. At 25, I took a bold risk. I purchased a large plot of land on the outskirts of Austin. It was an untouched stretch of land, overgrown with weeds, ignored by most people. But to me, it was like a giant blank canvas waiting to be painted with dream homes. I began by developing a cluster of 3 upscale houses, each with its own distinct style, but all designed with sustainability and elegance in mind. I personally supervised every detail, from the placement of windows to capture natural light to the choice of hardwood floors that would retain their beauty for years to come. When the project was completed, the homes sold so quickly I hadn't even finished posting all the signs. With that profit, I reinvested into more land, repeating the cycle and expanding further each time. What set me apart from many other developers was that I never worked with a quick profit mindset. I didn't just build to sell, I poured heart and strict standards into every project. I wanted anyone who stepped into a home I designed to feel warmth, safety, and luxury. That philosophy helped me quickly establish a reputation in Austin's real estate world. Word spread about a young woman entrepreneur, barely in her mid-20s, who dared to dream big, dared to take risks, and whose projects carried a unique signature. Many clients came to me not only to buy a house but because they trusted my vision and dedication. Even so, I kept a quiet lifestyle. I didn't flaunt my success on social media, nor did I host extravagant parties. I still drove the same pickup truck that had carried me through years of construction sites. My clothes were simple shirts and jeans. To me, true value didn't lie in luxury items put on display, but in the durability of what I had built. Once, a business partner laughed and said, "Eleanor, with the money you're making, you could live anywhere, drive anything." I simply replied, "I don't need to prove that. I know who I am." That answer slowly became my life philosophy. Throughout that journey, I found something more precious than money, a real family. Not my parents or my sister, but the builders, architects, and designers who had walked with me through every project. We shared rushed lunches at construction sites, sleepless nights finishing blueprints, sweat dripping in the sweltering Texas summer. When someone in the crew faced hardship, all of us came together to find a way to help. Once, when the home of one of our electricians was damaged by fire, I didn't hesitate to mobilize the whole team to rebuild it free of charge. That was the moment I realized, blood does not make a family presence and loyalty do. The greatest milestone of all was when I began building my own estate on a 7-acre plot of land. This was not just a house, but a symbol of my journey from a girl dismissed as worthless to a woman who built her own empire. I drafted the design myself. A 6,000 square foot mansion with high ceilings, glass walls facing an artificial lake, and a grand living room large enough to host gatherings with friends and colleagues. I reserved a study with towering bookshelves, where I could look out into the garden and draw inspiration. The kitchen was designed like a professional restaurant because I believe meals nurture connection. And most importantly, I built a garage big enough to house a collection of vintage cars I had loved since childhood, a gift to myself for the dreams I once never dared to imagine. The day the project was completed, I stood in the stone-paved courtyard, gazing at the mansion glowing under the sunset. Memories flooded back the times I was pushed away from the family dinner table, the words that dismissed me as a dreamer and useless, the tears I swallowed when my parents called me a failed experiment. All of it condensed into a feeling that was both bitter and sweet. Bitter because I had once been rejected. Sweet because I had come this far with my own two hands. No one could deny me anymore. This house, this land, every wall and every window was proof that I had won not against my family, but against the doubt and shame they had planted in me. Over those 10 years, I built not only a career but also a new identity for myself. I still remember clearly the day my name first appeared in an Austin real estate magazine. The article was about a new generation of young entrepreneurs reshaping the face of suburban Texas, and it featured a long section about me, a 33-year-old woman, founder of a high-end housing design and development company who had transformed overlooked plots of land into dream homes. A photo of me standing in front of my newly finished estate, wearing a white shirt and jeans, holding blueprints in my hand, filled half a page. For me, it was just a milestone, proof that years of effort were finally recognized. But for my old family, that article was like a bell tolling in the night, waking up the attention they had spent 10 years trying to shut off. The first to discover it was none other than a distant cousin I rarely spoke to. She saw the magazine in a doctor's waiting room, happened to read the article, snapped a picture, and sent it to the family group chat, the very one I had been excluded from long ago. Just a few days later, I began receiving strange signals. At first, it was vague messages. "Eleanor, how have you been lately? Your aunt and uncle heard you've been busy, but you're doing well, right?" Even people who hadn't called me once in a decade suddenly left long, sentimental notes about missing the old days together. Unknown numbers began showing up on my phone, and when I checked, they turned out to be relatives' names I had erased from my memory long ago. At first glance, someone might mistake it for belated concern. But I knew all too well what lay behind those words. Back when I was struggling and dismissed, they never bothered to look my way. Now, seeing my name in print, they scrambled to pull on threads of connection. They weren't reaching out for family, but for the shine of the spotlight I had created. I read every message, listened to every voicemail, and simply smiled. I didn't respond. Not a single line, not one returned call. Silence was the clearest answer. But deep down, I knew the texts and calls were only the beginning. I could already picture the script unfolding. One day, they wouldn't stop at phone messages. They would show up in the flesh, standing on the doorstep of the mansion they had never imagined I could build. I knew it was coming, like a storm gathering offshore, waiting for the right moment to crash onto land. I wasn't afraid, but I was preparing myself for that confrontation. Sometimes, in the quiet afternoons, as I sat in my study looking out at the artificial lake shimmering in the sunset, I thought back on the road I had traveled. From being called a failed experiment, from sitting at the far end of the dinner table, to becoming an entrepreneur recognized by the press. It was ironic that their distance and rejection had shaped me into the strong woman I am today. If they hadn't stripped me of my place in the family, perhaps I would never have grown this resilient. And now, as they began to turn their eyes back toward me, I no longer felt shaken. I saw it as the inevitable cycle of fate. People will overlook you when you have nothing, but once you rise to the top, they will look for ways to cling to you. That Sunday morning, the Texas sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows, filling my wide-open kitchen with warmth. I stood alone, hand wrapped around a French press, the rich aroma of coffee mingling with the stillness of the weekend air. On the white marble counter streaked with gray, I had already set out a small plate of pastries and an architecture magazine I often flipped through when searching for inspiration for new projects. The doorbell rang suddenly, long and insistent, echoing through the modern intercom system and shattering the stillness of the house. I frowned, irritated, because on this Sunday morning I wasn't expecting anyone. Neighbors rarely came by unannounced, and my friends and colleagues all knew I guarded my weekends as private time. I glanced at the control screen on the wall, where the security cameras automatically lit up to reveal whoever was at the gate. My heart stalled for a beat when I recognized those faces, the very faces I thought I had left behind a decade ago. Standing there, in front of my door, were none other than my parents, Robert and Linda, the same people who had once called me the lost child. Beside them was my sister Vanessa, with her new boyfriend, her expression still radiating that same smug confidence. And behind them, 2 or 3 relatives who had played their part in pushing me out of the family circle, those who had made me the outsider at every gathering for 10 years. The first sensation was a chill running down my spine. My chest tightened with memories of being excluded holidays, Christmases, Thanksgivings where my chair sat empty. Wounds I thought had healed suddenly began to sting again. I set the coffee spoon down on the counter, forcing my breath to steady so my hands wouldn't shake at the sight on the screen. But within seconds, I felt my fists clench, the initial surge fading, replaced by composure. I was no longer the fragile daughter who once trembled, begging for a place at the table. I was Eleanor Hart, the woman who had built an empire with her own hands. I straightened my posture, adjusted the silk blouse I was wearing, and walked toward the front door. I opened the door. As the light from the porch spilled in, I saw the unease flicker in each of their eyes. They no longer stood tall like rulers of the family, but like uninvited guests, hesitant and awkward. Vanessa's eyes darted around, her boyfriend swallowing hard at the sight of the walnut door carved with patterns and the gleaming solid brass handle. My father forced a smile, but his gaze kept drifting past me, toward the wide hallway leading into the open expanse of the living room. My mother clutched her handbag tightly, standing close to him as if she needed an anchor. I tilted slightly, my voice steady, without the slightest tremor. "Come in." From the moment they stepped onto the marble-tiled foyer, their eyes were drawn to every detail. The handcrafted chandelier hanging from the 20-foot ceiling shimmered with light. The artwork lining the hallway, the Persian rug stretched beneath their feet, everything seemed far beyond the imagination of a family that once mocked me for nothing but daydreams. Vanessa was the first to speak, her voice carrying a faint hesitation. "Eleanor, this place, it's beautiful." I gave a slight nod, saying little, and gestured for them to follow me deeper inside. The living room opened wide, its glass ceiling looking straight out onto the garden where a turquoise infinity pool seemed to merge with a distant line of trees. I saw my father swallow hard when his gaze landed on the Italian leather sofa set in the center of the room, while my mother kept glancing up at the ceiling and then down at the walnut floors, as if she couldn't believe this house belonged to the daughter she had once called a failure. Calmly, I poured coffee for each of them, set a tray of pastries on the table, and took a seat across from them. The atmosphere at first was filled with awkward small talk, asking about my health, mentioning the weather, pointing out the long drive it had taken to get there. Every word was gentle, but I could feel the tension rising, like a play they had rehearsed beforehand, waiting for the right cue to reveal its true purpose. After about 10 minutes, with the coffee cups half empty, my mother was the one to begin. She set her cup down, took a long breath, and spoke in a grave tone. "Eleanor, I know it's been a long time since we were together the way we used to be, but today I want to be honest. Vanessa is going through something. She's in the middle of a divorce. You know how complicated the legal process in Texas is these days, and attorney fees keep rising. Our family is really struggling." I sat still, my hands laced together, my eyes never leaving her face. In her voice I caught the mixture of false remorse and a very real anxiety, not about the fracture of family ties, but about the financial burden pressing down on them. Vanessa sat beside her, trying to hold herself steady, but I could see the cracks. Even flawless makeup couldn't hide the dark circles under her eyes, no doubt from sleepless nights spent fighting over assets with her husband. Yet, instead of turning to me for sympathy, she sat stiffly upright, her gaze fixed on the tile floor, as though the very act of asking help from the useless sister was harder to bear than the divorce itself. Before I could even respond, my father cut in, his voice low but pressing on every word as though trying to frame the request as a golden opportunity. "Eleanor, this could actually be an investment. You've built a strong company, you have capital, you have credibility. If you help the family through this period, not only will things stabilize, but it could also create long-term benefits for all of us. Investing in Vanessa, in our family's future, wouldn't that be good? He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, trying to look like a man offering a fair partnership. But in his eyes, I saw the desperation he couldn't quite disguise. I stayed silent, letting their words hang in the air. I knew very well this was no partnership, no opportunity. It was a request for money, wrapped in polished language. They hadn't come here to congratulate me, or to mend the bonds they had cut 10 years ago. They came for my wallet, the same wallet they once believed would never exist. I looked at each face in turn. My mother, anxious for a reaction. My father, straining to appear calm. Vanessa, bitterly silent, and the relatives exchanging expectant glances with one another. In that moment, my mind replayed the times I had been cast aside, the reunion invitations that never reached me, the parties where my name was scratched off the list, the sting of my father calling me a failed experiment. And now, here they were, sitting in my living room, under the roof I had built with sweat and tears, asking me for help. The irony was almost laughable, but I kept my face composed. I didn't need anger. The simple fact that they had to lower themselves to come here was proof enough that the balance had shifted. I set my coffee cup down, leaned back in my chair, and spoke with a calm but cutting edge. Interesting. So, after 10 years, the only connection left between us is the balance in my bank account? The room fell heavy. No one dared to respond right away. And in that silence, I knew the real conversation was only just beginning. I let a few seconds pass, stretching the silence across the vast living room. No one met my eyes. They all seemed to be waiting for me to let it go. But I had carried this weight for too long, and today it had to be spoken. I folded my arms, tilted my head slightly, my voice low and steady, sharp as a blade slicing through each memory. In the past 10 years, has a single one of you ever called me? Has anyone texted to ask how I was doing or if I needed help? Did anyone ever send me an invitation for Thanksgiving, Christmas, or any family reunion at all? Tell me, because I can't seem to remember. The room sank into a frightening silence. My mother pressed her lips together. My father stared into his coffee cup as if it could swallow him whole to avoid my question. Vanessa clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms, but she stayed quiet, unable to speak. I drew in a long breath and continued, my voice sharper this time. Let's start with the biggest event, Vanessa's wedding. The whole family gathered, posed for pictures, celebrated with a grand reception. Was I invited? No. I didn't even know it was happening until I saw the photos on social media. You laughed, you danced, you toasted, while I sat alone in a cramped apartment. Do you have any idea what it feels like to be cut out of a moment that important by your own blood? It's like a declaration that I was never part of this family at all. Vanessa lifted her head as if to say something, but I raised my hand to stop her. I'm not finished. When Mom had heart surgery 7 years ago, I left work, drove 4 hours to the hospital with a bouquet and an envelope of money to help with the expenses. And what did you say when I arrived at the reception desk? That I wasn't close family, that I should wait outside. Do you know what that felt like? I sat in the hallway, listening as names of loved ones were called to go in, while I was treated like a stranger. I waited there for hours and was finally allowed in for 5 minutes while Mom was still unconscious. I left the envelope, hoping it would help. But what happened after? No one mentioned it again, no one thanked me, no one even told me whether the money was used for the hospital bill. You simply erased me from the story. I could feel the tension rising in the room. Someone shifted uncomfortably in their seat. Vanessa pressed her lips so tightly they turned pale. I continued, this time locking eyes with my father. And then there's Ethan, your son, Vanessa. When he applied for college, I quietly transferred money to the family account to help cover his tuition. I didn't ask for recognition, only that he would have a better chance. But the money was sent back with a short message. We don't need it, didn't need it, or didn't want to admit that the so-called failed daughter was capable of helping. Do you have any idea how that felt? As if not only was my care rejected, but it was treated with contempt. I paused, letting the accusations hang in the air. The room remained silent, except for the ticking of the wall clock. I watched the color drain from each face. My mother's eyes rimmed with red, my father awkwardly averting his gaze, Vanessa with her head bowed toward the floor. Shame was seeping through the room, heavy enough to make it hard to breathe. But I was not finished. You came here today, into the house I built with my own hands from nothing, to talk about family, to say we should help one another. But I ask you, where was the family for me over the past 10 years? When I had to work 3 jobs at once to pay tuition? When I was studying and laboring on construction sites, my hands raw and bleeding, did any of you ever bring me a bottle of water or offer a word of encouragement? When I started my business with a bank loan hanging over my head, did anyone believe in me, or did you only laugh and call it a reckless gamble? I looked around the room, meeting each person's eyes. No. The answer is no. You only knew and imagined, failed Eleanor, and when I stood up and proved my worth, you came back pretending as if nothing had ever happened. Silence followed again, but this time it was not the silence of avoidance, it was the silence of those who knew they could no longer deny the truth. The wounds I had just spoken of were real, carved into memory, and now they were forced to face them. I leaned back in my chair and exhaled. I don't need apologies. I only need the truth to be spoken. And the truth is, you erased me from this family a long time ago. Don't pretend that we were only distant because of busyness or misunderstandings. This was your choice. And now, it is my choice too. The air in the room was so heavy I could hear the second hand ticking on the wall clock. I thought that after laying out each wound, everyone would remain silent until the end. But then a voice rose, not from my parents, not from Vanessa, but from her new boyfriend, a man I had only glimpsed a few times on social media. He adjusted his tie, sat up straighter, and spoke with confidence laced with condescension. Eleanor, I don't understand why you're taking this attitude. Family is family. If you have money, you should help. That's not a choice, it's an obligation. His words rang out, sharp and imposing, freezing the room even further. Every pair of eyes turned toward me, waiting to see how I would respond. For a split second, I was so astonished I nearly burst out laughing right away. A stranger, a man who had never seen the years I was excluded, who had never offered a hand when I fell, dared to lecture me on my so-called obligation to this family. The arrogance was both ridiculous and pathetic. I leaned back in my chair, my lips curling into a bitter smile, and then I laughed aloud. The sound echoed through the elegant room, unsettling everyone, leaving them all shifting uneasily in their seats. When my laughter faded, my eyes sharpened and my voice dropped low, each word precise. You just said obligation? What do you think I've been doing for the past 10 years? Sitting around, waiting for a chance to boast? Fine. If you want to see the truth, I'll show you. I pulled the tablet from the leather case beside my chair, tapped the screen, and opened the financial reports. Turning the screen toward the group, the numbers were unmistakable multi-million-dollar revenues each year, steady net profits, a transparent reserve fund. I didn't need to explain further. I simply pointed at the figures. This is the company I built with my own 2 hands, without a single dollar from this family, without a single word of encouragement. I didn't just survive, I thrived. I swiped to another folder and opened photos of my charitable foundation. The children's hospital I had funded to rebuild its treatment wing, thank you, letters from doctors, and a ribbon-cutting ceremony captured in a photograph. This is where I choose to put my money, to give sick children proper hospital beds, to give parents a little more hope. I haven't heard anyone in this family speak of obligation toward those children. Then I opened another file, this one showing the scholarship program I had created for trade students. Images of young people in uniforms appeared, holding certificates, their faces lit with proud smiles. Every year, I select students who want to learn a trade but cannot afford it, and I cover everything. Tuition, books, tools, even their first pair of safety boots. They are grateful, they work hard, and many of them have gone on to work for my company. I help them because they value the opportunity, because to them it is a doorway to a new life. I lifted my head and locked eyes with him, then swept my gaze slowly across everyone else. I help those who know how to value it. I help the people who stood by me, who respected my effort. Family is not a birth certificate, not names written in some registry. Family is how you treat each other. And how did you treat me? You cut me out of dinners, called me a failure, rejected me even when I reached out to help. You call that family? If that's family, then I don't need it. My words fell with finality, like a gavel striking down. No one spoke. Vanessa lowered her head, her hands clasped together, trembling. My mother opened her mouth as if to speak, but no words came, only her reddened eyes. My father gave a faint cough, his gaze drifting away, unwilling to meet mine. And the man who had just preached to me about obligation sat frozen, his lips twitching as if to form words, but nothing came out. The room stood stunned, as if they had just been confronted with a mirror reflecting the rawest truth. In their bewildered eyes, I saw no trace of the arrogance they once carried, only helplessness and shame. They had come here hoping to sway me with words of family and duty, but in the end, they were cornered by the very neglect they had shown for a decade. I took a small sip from the coffee left in my cup, calm as if I had just concluded a simple negotiation. Inside me there was no hatred, only clarity. The balance had shifted, and this time, I was the one with the final word. I let the silence blanket the room for a few more seconds, enough for each of them to sit with the weight of what I had just said. Then I rose slowly, my steps deliberate as I moved toward the front door. The sound of my heels echoed against the walnut floors, each beat marking the close of a conversation that had already gone too far. I placed my hand on the polished brass handle and turned it with finality. The door swung open, flooding the room with the bright Texas midday sun, its harsh light exposing truths no one wanted to face. I turned back, my voice calm but firm, no trace of hesitation. This is my home, not a rescue bank. If you came here looking for money, you've knocked on the wrong door. Their faces drained of color. Vanessa's lips moved as if to form words, but she dropped her gaze and stayed silent. Her new boyfriend, who had spoken so loudly earlier, now sat mute, his eyes darting away as though searching for an escape. My mother lifted her hand to cover her mouth, her eyes glistening with tears, while my father braced his palms against his knees, as if trying to summon back a shred of authority long lost. I said nothing more, only met their eyes with a look that made clear it was time to leave. One by one, they rose. The leather chairs creaked, half-finished cups of coffee still steaming on the table. Everything was left suspended, unfinished, as if the entire visit had unraveled before it could settle. As the group moved quietly toward the door, my mother stopped at the threshold. She turned back to me with pleading eyes, her voice trembling. "Eleanor, no matter what, we are still a family. You cannot deny that." I looked straight into her eyes, and for a moment I saw my whole childhood flash back, the family dinners where I was always seated at the end of the table, the times I held up my drawings only to receive a half-hearted nod. All of it condensed into a sharp ache. I drew a deep breath, then spoke, my voice clear, each word carved into the air. A family does not cast out a child for 10 years, and then come back only for money. A family does not erase someone from every celebration, only to return when pride and bank accounts need rescuing. If you want to call that family, then I'm sorry, I am no longer part of that definition. My father cleared his throat as if to argue, but his eyes drifted away. Perhaps he knew no excuse could erase the truth I had just laid bare. Vanessa turned quickly, as though afraid that one more word from me would shatter the last of her carefully kept pride. Her new husband placed a hand on her shoulder, urging her to move faster. A few of the relatives followed behind, none daring to meet my gaze. At last, only my parents remained standing at the threshold. My father gave a slight nod, half in defeat, half in an attempt to salvage a shred of dignity. My mother looked at me once more, her lips trembling but unable to form any words. I leaned to the side, one hand still holding the door open wide. "Go," I said quietly, not with anger anymore, only with exhaustion and finality. They stepped outside, leaving behind a silence so heavy it was almost eerie. I closed the door, the sharp click sounding like the final period at the end of a long chapter filled with hurt. For a few seconds, I leaned back against it, eyes closed, breathing deeply. I no longer felt the trembling or fear that had once haunted me. Instead, a strange lightness washed over me, as if I had finally placed a full stop on a toxic bond I had carried for half my life. Outside, the sound of car engines rumbled, then faded, disappearing down the private road that led to the gate. I walked back into the living room. The air still smelled faintly of coffee, while the sunlight from the infinity pool outside shimmered against the glass walls. I looked around. Everything remained intact, elegant, solid, just like me now. They had left, carrying with them only a pale, empty silence. I stayed, with this home, with the empire I had built. And this time, I knew with certainty that the door I had just closed would never open for them in the same way again. That evening, I didn't sit alone in the vast mansion. I drove into downtown Austin, where my closest friends and colleagues were waiting. We had dinner at our favorite restaurant, the table filled with steaming dishes, the air bursting with laughter. As our glasses clinked together, it struck me, this was my true family. The people who had stood with me under the burning sun, who had sweated with me on construction sites, who had stayed up all night perfecting blueprints, who had shared both failures and triumphs. None of them came to me for money or recognition. They were here because they valued me for who I was, and for the bond we had built together. A friend raised their glass, smiling. "Eleanor, we don't care how much money you have, we just need you here, with us." I nodded softly, the corner of my lips lifting. The words were simple, but they touched the deepest part of me. They reminded me that blood does not equal love. Family isn't just names written on paper, it's presence, it's how people treat one another. Driving home through the brightly lit streets, I thought about my journey. From the girl always pushed to the end of the table, to the one excluded from every reunion, to the woman who stood tall on her own strength and mind. I had come to understand this. You have the right to choose your family not by blood, but by respect and genuine care. And sometimes, healing doesn't mean patching up a fracture too deep to mend, but letting it go so you can walk forward on your own. When I returned home, I went straight to my study. On the desk lay sketches for my new community project. I sat down, turned on the lamp, and picked up a pencil, adding a few more lines. It wasn't a mansion this time, but a community center, a place where children of working-class families could draw and read, where their parents could attend free skill-building classes. I wanted this project to carry my true mark, building to give, building to plant hope. The golden light spilled across the paper, casting a glow on my face. I smiled. Out there, the iron gate had closed for good on toxic ties. In this room, there was only me, my dreams, and new paths opening ahead. I knew then. I hadn't lost a family, I had simply chosen again, a family made of presence, love, and gratitude. And this time, I was truly free.